Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. see you on the air.
Is it on?
Yep.
Oh.
Here we go.
Say.
Good afternoon and welcome. Those of you here and those of us joining online. I'm thank you, your host, the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes at Arizona State University. As Dan said, we would like to say welcome to today's students. Welcome to those of you joining our programming. A lot has changed since the last time we held an event, which was February of 2020. However, way this story of COVID is written, we know that science and technology was playing a big part in that event. We also have a new administration in place, and the science has been elevated to the cabinet level, so we have a lot of new opportunities and also new sets of challenges. On the institutional front, we also have some changes to support. The academic part of our house, the School for Future Innovation and Society, has been combined with the School for Sustainability and the campus at to form a new college for global futures at Arizona State University. And last but exchange, we've been kind of acting as a conduit, doing this kind of events, but also publishing. So we have the Journal of Science and Technology that we will publish with the National Academy, have the Rightful Place for Science book series that we have there, and we also have a series of projects that we on the idea of kind of dialogue between experts, citizens, and stakeholders about science and society. So this New Tools for Science Policy seminar series and the Political Conversation dates back to a little over 10 years. And if you don't know this, the last time we hosted seminar series was November 16, 2011, exactly.
No kidding.
Years ago. And so it's just, and at that time we was talking about a project, a small scale at that time, called To Think, To Write, To Publish. And it was about where we teamed up 12, I think, pairs of a science policy scholar and a science writer to write a piece for publications in nonfiction and all these scientific technology and other outlets. But that sort of started this whole genre that Lee, who is the one of the founders or the founder of creative nonfiction, labeled as godfather of this genre, who brought this into. Okay, all right. Brought this to our science policy field where we were seriously lacking, how do we tell stories about that matter and true stories. And out of that effort, I think we also got a National Science Foundation grant where two National Science Foundation grants to expand that. And then we further expanded to the idea of science and religion with another big grant from the Templeton Foundation. So, a lot has changed, and this change has been I think, quite welcome in the science policy space. And it gives me really great pleasure to welcome Lee back to DC and to an audience, and for the first time and in person. And we're hoping to make this more regular now, have one event at least a month. So be on the lookout for future offering. And with that, Lee, the floor is yours.
Mahmoud, thank you. And thanks everybody else. I was really I'm good, I think. I was really quite excited to be able to do this again because this is my first in-person experience since COVID hit. And so I've zoomed my heart out. And I gather there's a lot of Zoomers out there today, but to have real people here to talk to is really quite exciting. And I wasn't sure anybody would come. So for one thing, I brought my son, just in case, my son is there, just in case nobody else came. But I didn't know that there would also be a puppy here. So we got a puppy that you can't see, but what kind of puppy? What?
It's a schmaltzy.
A schmaltzy?
It's a Maltese.
Oh, okay. So we got a son, we got a puppy, and we got the rest of you. So this is really terrific. So I'm probably over-prepared, but I'm going to tell you what I wanted to tell you. And I should say, we're talking a lot about science policy and writing true stories. And the thing is, it's not just science communication or science writing or economics writing or policy writing. It's good writing. And because it doesn't matter what the subject is, if you can write well, and if you can figure out how to reach a reader, then no matter what you're talking about, you're going to make a hit, you're going to make an impact, and you're going to communicate with your audience, whomever that audience is. So I got slides. When I first came to ASU, I was a creative writing teacher. I spent 30 years in a creative writing program, and nobody had slides. I mean, slides. But I realized right away, if I was going to communicate to you people, other people, the only way I can make you pay attention is to do slides. And so I've become slide crazy. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what creative nonfiction is. And then after that, I'm going to just show you some structure. I'm going to take it apart for you and show you how one thing that we do as creative nonfiction writers work. And there's all kinds of other things that you might want to talk about, and that's okay. But I've focused in on this structure just so you can see how you can take information, whatever information you happen to want to impart and connect with readers. So what is creative nonfiction? It's got a lot of names. People call it literary nonfiction. People call it long form. The thing to remember is that right now, it's the fastest growing genre in the publishing world. And there are all kinds of offshoots of creative nonfiction: narrative law, narrative medicine, narrative science, as you know, narrative history, and it is the cash cow these days of creative writing programs, not just in the United States, but in the UK, in New Zealand, in Australia. Creative nonfiction is the whole idea of these true stories to communicate information has really caught on in a very positive and exciting way. But it's really not new. The name is new, but creative nonfiction as a genre, or creative nonfiction as something that people did and continue to do, is way not new. The first, Daniel Defoe is supposed to be, he is the father of English journalism. And a long time ago, he wrote Robinson Crusoe. And lots of people think that Robinson Crusoe is the first real piece of creative nonfiction. Now, this wasn't, even though it says somewhere that it's written by the author or written by the sailor who was stranded, it wasn't really true. A guy named Alexander Selkirk was the guy who was stranded for 4 years on a desert island, but Defoe took the story and turned it into his own. This book by Defoe got a lot of attention ever since the Journal of the Plague Year. Got a lot of attention ever since the pandemic, because so many things about what Defoe captured supposedly in 1665 turned out to be quite accurate and true. The kind of life that those folks lived was pretty much the kind of lives that many of us were leading over since the pandemic struck. So it says down here, by the way, written by a citizen who continued all the while in London, never made public before. Well, first of all, this has turned out to be based upon the information that was available then. This has turned out to be a very, very accurate portrait of the plague in 1665. But the real truth of the matter is that in 1665, Defoe was 8 years old. And so he wrote this as if he was 8, taking part of this, the idea of pushing literature a little bit further, wrote it as if it had happened to him, but it didn't happen to him. And it turned out that it took 20 or 25 years for people to even know that Daniel Defoe was the author of that book. So those are the real, but it's a great book. It's really interesting to read. But it's got creative nonfiction. It's got a long history. Henry David Thoreau was writing creative nonfiction. George Orwell was writing creative nonfiction when he immersed himself deep into the trenches, both in Paris and London, and talked about and gave incredibly graphic details, captured scene after scene of what it was like to live during the Depression in London and in Paris. He worked in kitchens, scrubbing pots and pans. He grubbed cigarette butts from the street. He immersed himself deeply in what it was like to be poverty-stricken back then. And so that's a wonderful read, by the way. And again, it resonates to some of the things that are happening today in this country and in other countries. And of course, Rachel Carson was a scientist and captured the world and changed the world with that book, Silent Spring. So there were people who said that Rachel Carson was writing in a too poetic manner to really connect with an audience of real readers. But of course, that wasn't really true. And if you read Silent Spring, there is tons of information that changed the world, but it's couched in poetic language and in story. So it's been a very effective book of creative nonfiction that really wasn't considered, as I said, creative nonfiction before. It was just like people were just writing these true stories, but it was not fiction, it was not poetry, it was not drama, it was just somewhere else. Truman Capote, you know, in Cold Blood, he called what he was doing a nonfiction novel. It changed the world of the literary world, and the journalistic world changed when Tom Wolfe came upon the scene and decided to call this genre the new journalism, okay? It wasn't, as I showed you before, it wasn't new. It was being done repeatedly by many different kinds of authors, but he was quite a figure. He really made people stand up and look. You notice he's wearing a white suit. He always wore a white suit. He wore a white suit in the winter. He wore a white suit in the summer. It didn't matter. He would change his shirt and change his tie. But the white suit was the one way in which he captured attention. And his compadre, the other person who was responsible for this new journalism, this new way, and it was real journalism. If you've ever read The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, it is really captivating and it's all true. And he really digs deeply into the souls and the lives of the pilots who were championing the space, our charge into space so long ago. But he did it with a certain style, a certain kind of writing that brought the informational world into the world that the readers could connect, which is all, again, what creative nonfiction is all about. Lately, this has been a pretty big book, don't you think? So he provides a ton of information, all of his books, about the medical world and the science world, but he's always telling stories that allow you, that get you, the reader, to make this connection between information and story, real people. This has been, from a science policy standpoint, it's been an incredibly successful book. It's one of the greatest science-oriented books, as many critics have said, ever written. It's a gigantic bestseller. It became an HBO movie. It's going to live forever. And if you dig through this deep enough, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, if you dig through this deep enough, Rebecca, by the way, is my student, my former student. She wrote the first draft of this book in my class, and it's a lot better book now since she left my class, but still. But science policy is really spotlighted here after a while, after the story gets going. The story. This is what we do, we creative nonfiction writers. We think about information and we think about stories. If there's something for you to consider, something for you to think about, first of all, you got to think about your readers, of course. Who's reading? If you're writing for your colleagues, if you're writing for the choir, then you're going to write in a different way. You're not going to have to worry so much about story. But what worries me, or what challenges me, and what challenges the creative nonfiction writer or the new journalist, whatever you want to call us, generally is not just the policy, not just the science, but how what we do as policy wonks, as science people, what we do to connect to the readers who will be impacted by the things we are working on now, the general public. And so, what I'm going to talk to you about, and what I am talking to you about, is how to take information and feed it, give it to a reader, so that a general reader, a reader will understand and appreciate your work, our work, and make a connection to the things that we do best, and the things we sit around and think about and write grants about, whatever. So readers and story. We all know, research shows this again and again, that people remember more facts for a longer period of time when those facts are communicated in story. And we all know this as well. People are more easily persuaded if you have an idea, if you have a plan, if there's a controversy and you want to show your side of the controversy, people are more easily persuaded to take your point of view and your side, and if you present it in story. Now, of course, the story you tell will be slanted to whatever it is your point of view is. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you are couching the information and your ideas in story. So you have to figure out, as I said to you before, who your readers are. And you want to make sure that they're going to stay with you as long as possible. Reader studies show that after the first page, if it is a magazine article, unless you have captured a reader enough, you're going to lose 30% of the readers who look at your work initially. You know how there's so much to read. There's so very much to read in magazines and newspapers. And I know you've done this before. I do this all the time. I leaf through a magazine and I read the first couple of paragraphs and I make a decision. Am I going to continue? Am I going to commit my time to what this writer has written? Or am I going to go to the bathroom, call up for some pizza, or move on to the next story? You make this decision, and that decision is made quite quickly. You guys have information thrown at you constantly. And so you want to get your reader fascinated by story, and perhaps, hopefully, the people involved in the story as soon as you possibly can. And you want to keep them with you so that you can tell them the information that you know is important for them to know. And just as a side comment, I've spent 12, maybe 14 years as part of ASU, and everybody's talking all the time about science communication, science this, science that. We're science communicators, we're science writers. I got a problem with that because the word science itself begins to isolate people who are not scientists, okay? So the whole science communication world, one time I was on a train, Greenwich, Connecticut, going to New York, and I saw this. Somebody had a New York Times, and it was that day of the week, I can't remember which, when they focused on science. They had a science section. I swear this happened. The guy had a nice suit on, nice tie. He was probably a trillionaire advertising executive or something. And he opened up the New York Times, saw the science section, and flipped it over his head. Okay, that doesn't happen all the time. But what we try to do is, again, to give information to write well and not necessarily care initially about what that subject is all about. So let's do story, okay? And I'm asking you, please, I'm not asking you not to not think, okay? I am asking you, when you begin to write, not necessarily think right away about the point that you want to make, okay? I would rather that you think about what is the story that's going to lead to that point. So from here on, I'm going to talk about one structure, about one way to go about it. There are other structures, but this is the way, this is kind of the traditional narrative structure, the way to write well, no matter what the subject is, and connect with your readers as soon as you can. And so it's not that you're not supposed to think about the point you want to make, but you gotta figure out how to get the story that's gonna suck your readers in and get to the point you want to make. This is the challenge. Because creative nonfiction, literary nonfiction, whatever you want to call it, is a balancing act. Style is the way in which you write, the story-oriented stuff. And substance is what it is you want your readers to learn, what it is you want your readers to walk away with after they read whatever story you write, whether it's 800 words or 8,000 words. The idea is to inform while keeping the reader interested and involved. And so the structure I want to talk about today is what we in this narrative nonfiction, creative nonfiction world work on more than almost anything else. The idea of figuring out how to write scenes, because scenes are the building blocks of creative nonfiction. And I'm going to show you now, I'm going to deconstruct a number of scenes just to show you how they come together, okay? And this is not the only way to write creative nonfiction, but it is it's a way to show you how to engage your readers as soon as you possibly can. So so you want to try to start with the scene. And once you understand the structure of a scene, as I'll show you in a little bit, once you understand the structure of a scene, then you will be able to see how the scenes come together for longer pieces of work. So, and you always, hopefully, want to start in one way or the other with kind of a scene to get that reader involved, as I have just talked about. We need to worry about our readers all the time. So scenes usually start with a single idea or an event. And they usually focus on a problem, a conflict, a challenge, no matter what the subject is, because all of us have our own conflicts, our own challenges, and our own problems, and we can connect, even though it's maybe a subject that we don't necessarily know a lot about or are even interested in, but we are all interested in how people face challenges and problems and get by them or get through them. So I'm going to show you some examples, and some of them are general, and some of them are related to what you guys are interested in, science and policy. This comes from a best-selling nonfiction book, a memoir from Sarah Strayer. The trees were tall, but I was taller, standing above them on a steep mountain slope in Northern California. Moments before, I'd removed my hiking boots and the left one had fallen into those trees, first catapulting into the air when my enormous backpack toppled onto it, and then skittering across the gravelly trail and flying over the edge. It bounced off a rocky outcropping several feet beneath me before disappearing into the forest canopy below. Impossible to retrieve. I let out a stunned gasp. Although I'd been in the wilderness 38 days, and by then I'd come to know that anything could happen and that everything would. But that doesn't mean I wasn't shocked when it did. My boot was gone. Actually gone. First two paragraphs, if you want to call that second a paragraph, the first two paragraphs of that book. And so we're rather interested. This is kind of serious, right? It takes half the book before Cheryl gets back to what happened to her and what happened to the boot. And in that first part of the book, we learn about the Pacific Crest Trail. We learn about heroin and her addiction. We learn about her mother's death. We learn all kinds of things that Cheryl, the writer, wanted to tell us. But we are stuck with this memory that doesn't go away about these 10 lines and where her boot has gone and what she's going to do traipsing through the Pacific Crest Trail with only one boot. Yes, sir. Both boots are gone, man. They're gone. Oh, actually, my boot was gone. Maybe it is, but yeah, it is a single boot. Sorry. Yeah. But still, hopping around the Pacific Crest Trail is not an easy matter. So she captures us with this first scene. Here's another first scene. In the darkness, I get turned around and upside down. I can see only what's immediately in front of my face, like a scuba diver in murky waters, and it's completely disorienting. Everything looks unfamiliar in the dark. I start to head in a direction I think is the right one, and then I realize it's wrong, but I can't tell whether I'm upside down or right side up. I read some mile markers, numbers attached to the handrails, to Megan in mission control, hoping she can help tell me where I am. It looks much different in the dark, I tell Megan. Roger that, she says. Did I not go far enough? I ask. Let me go back to my safety tether. I figure once I find the place where my tether is attached, I'll be able to get my bearings. We're working on queuing up the sun for you, Megan jokes, but it's going to be another 5 minutes. I look in the direction I think is the Earth, hoping to catch a glimpse of some city lights 250 miles below. In the darkness, I get my bearings. It's just, if I just knew which way Earth is, I could figure out where I am on the truss. When I look around, all I see is black. A first scene, okay? And that kind of, whether you're interested in space or not, you're interested in Scott and what is going to happen to Scott. And so it's quite effective. When that little quote, when he was rereading it, and he read that, he said, when I read that, it still gives me goosebumps. So again, a scene, one more scene, and then I'll go on. Hey, Kim, I have no idea how my timing is. So when I have, say, 10 minutes left, let me know. 12:35? Holy cow. Okay. Well, I'll move ahead faster than I'll skip that one and go to the next. So let me just show you how here's another scene and show you how it's structured. I was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and I saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. Pretty darn good sentence, right? That's really good. First sentence, okay? Action. Then there's setting, or if you want to call it information. It was just after dark. A blustery March wind whipped into the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Information. Back to action. Mom stood 15 feet away. She had tied rags around her shoulders to keep out of the spring chill and was picking through the trash while her dog, a black and white terrier mix, played at her feet. Back to information. I won't read that to you, but it gives even more information and gives you the idea of what kind of relationship she had as a young girl with her mom. And finally, action again. To the people walking by, she probably looked like any of the thousands of homeless people in New York City. It had been months since I laid eyes on Mom, and when she looked up, I was overcome with panic, and that she'd see me and call out my name, and that someone on the way to the same party would spot us together, and Mom would introduce herself, and my secret would be out. First scene of this book, okay? And we don't get to why Mom was in the dumpster rooting around until the last chapter of the book. But you never forget it. You read all kinds of things about what happened to her during the 250 pages between that first few paragraphs, but you never forget this thing that her mom was rooting through the dumpster and she was ignoring her mom and going to a party. Quickly. Action, information, more action, more information, and more action with a beginning and an ending of the scene. A good scene has a beginning and an end. It's like an island in an ocean, okay? The ocean you're gonna write about a little bit later, but making a scene compelling and integrating information and action is the most effective way you can get your readers to go with you so that you can, in one way or the other, tell them what you know you want to tell them. So something usually has to be at stake, as we've discussed. How can Cheryl survive without her hiking boots? What happened to Scott, marooned in the blackness of space? Why is Jeanette's mother in the dumpster? You make your readers, this is really the key when you're writing these things. You make your readers want to know something. That's how you begin, to get them compelled to know something, and you don't tell them, or you don't tell them yet. You suck them in. You get them really engaged, ready to wondering about the people that they are learning about, wondering about the challenges. And then you tell them what you now want to tell them about science, about policy, about technology. Of course, it has to relate to the story, you understand. But you never tell a reader what they want to know until you have told them what you want them to know, okay? Never tell a reader what they want to know after you get them to want to know something. You wait until you tell them what you know they need to know or what you know you want to tell them. Now, at least one more thing. I want to talk about structure. I've already talked about structure, but I want you to remember that these themes I'm talking about are elastic, okay? Once you get a story that you are telling your reader, you can fill the story with information that you want them to know. But the scenes are what make it real to the reader and effective. So your scenes are elastic. You stretch them out if you can. So here with Scott, or you take them back. So here's what I read to you from Scott. And look, this paragraph about the way in which the Russians approach spacewalking, different than the way in which the United States approaches spacewalking, was into there. It's what Scott wrote. I took it out. I took it out in order to show you that information can go out and in once you have the seed. So that's gone, okay? I just plain old took it out. Maybe Scott will be mad at me if he ever finds out I did this, but what? But wait, I also am showing you that you can put information in once you have this structure, this scenic structure. So he could picture Megan. He could tell us what she looks like. He could capture what he imagined mission control looked like. He could tell us almost anything that relates to spacewalking. He could even tell us, if he wants to bring the Russian paragraph back in, how the Chinese deal with spacewalking or how other people deal with spacewalking. Once you have that story structure, you can stretch it out or contract it any way you want to do that. And so again, he could talk about what it looks like while hovering over the Middle East and what he imagines. He could just give us much more of a picture what he might want us to see as we are with him and he is dangling in the dark in the middle of space. So the scene is the building, okay? It's the frame. And once you get the frame, you are able to begin to inform and teach your reader whatever it is that you think your reader needs to know that relates to the frame. Notice that the elements, there are many elements of scene. Notice that that creative nonfiction is true stories, it's fact-checked, it's information, accurate information, but we use techniques of the fiction writer, literary techniques, in order to make it more vivid and more real. So hopefully, because your readers are people, you will have people in these scenes, the way in which you write these scenes. And since your readers talk to people, you'll have dialogue, you'll have a certain amount of description, there will be a setting, and there will always be action. The action drives the story. Something happens that moves forward. You don't have to have all these elements of a scene in every scene that you write, but if you have a few, that really works. Dialogue and dialogue works almost more than anything else. But these are all the elements that you consider when you write a scene. Scenes lead a reader, and I've kind of said this in a number of different ways, into what you want them to think about. I like this example a lot because it provides setting, situation, action, the whole what's at stake factor in one paragraph. In 1988, John Brunston bought a house in Yorktown Heights, a suburb of New York City. His wife decorated bedrooms for their 3 daughters, and Brunston planted a cherry tree and an American flag. Then came the spring rains, and Brunston discovered a dark fountain of human waste bubbling up from his backyard. He did everything he could to stop the sickening flow. He consulted engineers, installed a new septic tank, purchased sump pumps, dumped ton after ton of fresh soil over the years. He spent tens of thousands of dollars, but that evil smelling goop still percolated to the surface. A great first paragraph that is scenic, not necessarily in kind of a scene, but has all of the elements to get the reader interested and involved, at least to go forward. Kim, were you giving me a signal? 10 minutes. I can't hear you. Okay. He spent tens of thousands of dollars, but the evil smelling gloop still percolated to the surface. Then information. We don't know what happened to poor Brunston, but then some background information to begin to put into context that first paragraph or scene. Then He goes back to the action, okay? And the what's at stake factor. And just to go back here to read that last part, but neither John Brunston nor anyone else on this lovely block of Yorktown Heights can hook up to a sewer because the sewers of Yorktown Heights are already full. In fact, they're running at 100,000 gallons of waste per day beyond capacity. So Brunston's backyard must absorb Brunston's waste. And back to the action one more time. And it cannot. And then information. He's got you sucked in. He's got you worried about poor old John and his house in Yorktown Heights. And then you start providing the information to fill in all of the details of the story that was missing. So one more thing, because I know my time is limited. That's the way in which you structure a scene. But it's not only the way in which you structure a scene, it is the way in which you structure longer pieces of work. I'll skip that and just show you one more thing. Skip poor Rebecca's flute. Now you know how to write a scene. How do the scenes fit into longer pieces of work? First, there's a scene. You suck your readers in. You get them involved. And then there's information. And then, after you think your reader is going to be bored to death with your information, okay, you either continue your story or figure out how you can write another connective scene. And then again, information. And then again, a connective scene. And then information. Pretty soon, I think you'll find that you're going to be writing more scenes than giving information, because every time you write a scene, you're embedding information inside that scene. And finally, what I like to call the yellow test. I write until I'm finished. And then, I think I can't go any further. Have I done this right? Have I been able to suck a reader in, get them committed, get them interested in my story and the people involved in my story? And then have I been able to teach them something? Have I been able to do this style, substance, rhythm that I've talked about? And so I give my work the yellow test. I take a yellow magic marker, no big deal, and I yellow in the scenes. And I know that if I have this balance, half yellow, half not yellow, I know I've been able to at least come close to effectively communicate my ideas. This was just done for me by an artist a long time ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, after I gave a longer version of this talk. And I always like to end it because it's so cool. The artist was, I lost touch with her, but she worked for NASA at the time. So anyway, what we got, I've rushed through this, I know, but I hope it's been helpful. And if you have any questions, I may or may not be able to answer them.
So with questions, we'll do one here, and we also have online. So if you're watching this online, you can write Kim, they can put the questions online and we'll alternate and we'll see how it goes. So first question from here.
Yes, sir.
Did she ever get her boot back?
Yeah, she did. No. What happened? I'm giving away the story here, but well, I don't care. It's not my book. So about halfway through, she figures out how to get another pair. But it takes a long time to get to that. And not that the book isn't interesting. I found it a really terrific book. I was fascinated by it, the way in which she was challenged by, with no experience at all, by the Pacific Coast Trail, but you never forget the boot. Never. How many people read that, by the way? Anybody read the book? Yeah. Did you forget the boot? You forgot the boot. Ah!
I was
I
wondering,
have nothing more to say about that. So, Leah.
do you think that you should adapt that structure? Or are there any changes that you would make for presenting information in a different format? So like if you were making a podcast episode about something, would you want to have like a higher scene ratio? Or do you think that that structure still holds across media?
I think that structure is great for the written word, but is much more challenging for if you're dealing with an audio format. I worked for 3 years for NPR, and some time ago, and I was hired. Actually, I became a consulting editor. I was on air, but basically, what they wanted me to do is teach this story structure to their reporters and producers, and it was really hard to be able, 7 minutes or 6 minutes, and the first 30 seconds or 60 seconds dealt with the story, and then they went off the information. And lots of times they felt that the audience, the listeners, lost the story by the time you couldn't go back. You know, you couldn't go back. So lots of times they felt this wasn't as successful as it could have been unless you continually, in your 7 minutes, reminded the listeners of what the story was. And sometimes you couldn't quite do that. So it needs to, it requires some of that adaptation, and it did. Hopefully, my time at NPR helped those folks on the science decks become better storytellers, or be more interested in the story. One thing I have discovered, both at NPR and with reporters generally, is they downgrade the story. First, they do all the research and the information they need in order to report whatever it is they need to report. And then when they're all done, they say, now what's the story I should put in there? That's not necessarily the way to do that. You need to think about the story determines the action. Sorry, the story determines the information you provide, okay? And so when you decide to write your story, you want to suck them in, you want to get them involved. But that story, I mean, you have tons of information. What aspect of information am I going to communicate to my reader? And it's usually the story that determines it. So you have to think, while you're doing the research, what story am I going to tell to put this research, this information in context? Yes, I'm sorry.
I just wondered if this could be applied to scientists who are notorious for using jargon. You know, when you go to a poster session, they use indecipherable language. And I just wondered if you've also followed Alan Alda's ideas in bringing science or technical things to the general public.
Of course, and there are many science people who write about science who have, and not just Alan Alda is not a scientist, but yeah, this is a structure that scientists should use. In my experience, dealing with scientists for a long time, even prior to joining ASU, is scientists are so, and I say this with love and devotion, okay? But scientists are so involved in their science that they often don't want to stop to take the time to figure out how to communicate correctly to a general audience. Because what I've just told you, I just told it to you in a long 40 minutes or 45 minutes. But I promise you that you're going to go back to your office or home or wherever you're going to do, and you're going to try to do this, and you're going to find out that it is really hard to do. It isn't easy to do that. And scientists need to try to figure out how to give enough time to take these and I'm not sure, again, I'm generalizing, I know, but I'm not quite sure how many scientists or even how many people in science policy think a lot about the people who will be impacted by the work and the ideas they do. I'm not sure. So yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Mahmoud he's the microphone man, okay?
My name is Samar Chatterjee, Safe Foundation. You started with creative nonfiction,
Yeah.
and you gave some examples. One of them that stuck to me was Daniel Defoe. And if that is nonfiction, I don't know how far we can go back. Would you consider these mythologies like Iliad, Odyssey, or Ramayana, Mahabharata, or for that matter, Bible? All these are creative nonfiction, or they're creative fiction? What is it?
So I had lunch a while ago with a stockbroker, and he asked me what I did, and I said I wrote creative nonfiction. You know what creative nonfiction is? I said, because so many people don't. And he said, yeah, it's the Bible. Okay, and in many respects, based upon the technology of the times, they're telling as true a story as they possibly can, the writers, the prophets who wrote the Bible. So to answer your question, that's not creative nonfiction, but in some quarters, but this blend of people are these days taking a lot of liberties, and then, as did Daniel Defoe, with this blend of story and information. And there are constant debates, ethical and moral debates and questions in my field about how far we can go, how much we can embellish, and until the tide turns from nonfiction, from truth, to imagination, and as you said, fiction. So I can't answer the question. I can only say that that no one will ever answer the question, because everybody has different ideas about what it all means and is. My message only is figure out the story and figure out what information you want to communicate through that story, and you'll connect with more readers than you would in any other way.
Jonathan Cooper-Smith, Texas A&M. And it seems to me that one person is missing from the story you've been telling, and that's the editor, or having a good editor to tell you this is what you should be doing, or giving you viable feedback, or saying this is what our readers want. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about the importance of finding a good editor, or educating a good editor, or a good editor educating you.
Yeah, it's hard to answer. Having a good editor who will speak kindly to you and honestly is a real challenge, okay? And there's some damn bad editors around, but some really effective ones as well. There are two kinds of editors, by the way, at least in this particular field. There's the shape editor. Okay, I've been talking to you about structure or shape. I have not been talking to you about line editing and copy editing and things like that. That's a different kind of editor. And the real challenge is to find the shape editor. That editor who will help you define and carve out your story. It's easy to find a good copy editor, but a shape editor, very challenging. And who's the editor of the New Yorker, by the way? What's that guy's name? David Rednick. Okay, so I spent a little time with John McPhee not too long ago, and what he does is he works on the telephone all the time with the shape editor, okay? Goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until the shape editor and John are all on the same page. And then he starts to worry about clarity, okay? And so shape is first, not necessarily all the way in which the words were put together. It's the shape, the story that matters. And then was clarity next. and he was ready to make a phone call, he usually goes and sits there with his clarity editor at the New Yorker. But of course, during COVID, he can't. So he was ever to make a phone call. So he was phone calling one of his favorite former students. And who was that? Who's the editor of New Yorker? Who? David Remnick. So he was getting the absolute best of editorial direction. And especially, it's so exciting when you're doing it with a former student. So there are two kinds of editors. You want somebody good, and you need to worry about trusting your editor. And the other thing is, just because they're editors, it doesn't mean they know more than you. So there's a challenge there. I don't think I've totally answered your question, except you got to really look for a great editor and try them out. You know, it's like looking for a good physician. I hope you don't go to the first physician and just accept him or her because they have MD beside their name. You want to make sure that person who is editing your work is the kind of editor you want to work with.
Yeah.
We've got one question from online.
Go ahead.
So Carol Callie says, scenes imply legwork, arranging interviews with people affected by topics being covered and so forth. Is this true and necessary? And the recent film Dark Waters does very well with scene information balance.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Say the first part. Yeah.
Scenes imply legwork, arranging interviews with people affected by topics being covered and so forth. Is this true and necessary?
Well, in all good worlds, the legwork is important in scenes, but there are all kinds of people and all kinds of scenes I have written that I have done through the internet or through conversations with other people. Remember that the building blocks of creative nonfiction is scene. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to see the scene. It doesn't necessarily mean that you got to be there when it happens. You can, I can't tell you how many writers I have talked to, from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to the New Yorker, and my work on my own, that I have not had, who have written vibrant, exciting scenes by doing a series of interviews on the phone or looking up information on the internet. It is possible to recreate stories that people tell you and turn them into accurate scenes. And recreate is so many stories from the magazines and newspapers that you enjoy so many scenes are recreated through interviews. And so legwork's terrific, but so often you just need some mind work. And when you're interviewing someone, whether it's on telephone, online, or in person, you got to remember that the building blocks of creative nonfiction are seen. I have said this to you a number of times, but when you interview, just like when you interview for story as much as you interview for information, okay? A lot of the information that the people you are interviewing can give you can probably be found online or can probably be found from someone else. But their personal take, what happened to them, how they discovered whatever it is they discovered is your lifeline to making a connection. And so when you talk to people you're interviewing, talk story. What can you remember? What did that day look like? What happened to you that day? What did he say? What did he look like when he said it? All that stuff to help you build your story. Once you got the story, as I have pointed out to you, once you've got the story, then you can figure out what information you want to provide.
So I think we're out of time, but I'll make two observations that.
Are they going to be nice?
Yeah.
Okay.
So first of all, the role of the editor. So, I've been, my area is participatory technology assessment and been trying to tell the story, or there was Office of Technology Assessment, blah, 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 blah. And then we were working with Lisa Marginelli, our editor in chief for
Yes.
issues. He says, start your story by putting a person at the table, what it is like to be in one of these. And that's what we did. And it had much better resonance than we ever did telling the story for the last 10 years. So I think, to your point, creating that scene was really, really important here. The other thing is, as I'm listening to you, and another area where we evangelize this idea, use-inspired science, usable science. The first word is, don't start with the most interesting research question, start with the problem.
There you go.
And
There
so
you go.
we are kind of taking your approach or your recipe and actually try to do science in a way that is more responsive to societal problems and need. And in part of your presentation, you also talked about stakes, and we're now talking about stakeholders. So I think all of this is idea of flipping the way we do science, and also it mirrors how we tell stories. And I think it has great resonance. It's probably part of the reason why it has so much traction, that this creative nonfiction is now picking up, and as we are trying to do more use inspired and problem facing science. So thank you, Lee. It's been wonderful, and you never tire of this, and we'll continue to sort of spread your gospel, and hopefully we'll keep engaged. And please be on the lookout. As I mentioned, we have a number of publications where our editors are very happy to work with you on your stories. So the Issues of Science and Technology that's published, please do take advantage and join us for our next event. And Lee, thank you so much.
Thank you.